With the release of the second set right on the horizon, I'd like to go back and finish my coverage of the MLP card game. What I'd like to do here is start a mini-series talking about each of the different colors and talk about what the colors bring to the table and how you can make them work for you. We're going to start off this little series with purple. People who are a little more into the MLP series might also refer to this as magic, but I'm going to call it purple because it's the most recognizable for people who aren't that big into the fan base but still play the card game. It's also a little bit easier for some of our younger viewers to follow. Purple is a very manipulative color. The main advantage to playing purple is that you can very easily control your opponent's advantages. One of the main powerhouses of the set is this little girl right here, Spring Forward. Right now she's a very difficult card to deal with because the +2 boost she gets for every character she's facing happens during both players' turn and during all phases. Let's say your opponent has a field set up like this. By playing Spring Forward here, we get a +4 boost because she's facing 2 characters at her problem. Not only is she now strong enough to solve the problem by herself, but when they have the face-off, she has a clear power advantage. This pony creates a clear problem for your opponent and should be used in every purple deck. There's also a slightly smaller version of Spring Forward called Rare Find. Rare Find isn't quite as powerful as Spring Forward, but he is also a lot easier to play. This could make him a great early play for your deck, so please keep him in mind. He still puts in a lot of work if you're fighting against blue decks or yellow decks. There are 2 cards of Twilight herself you should look into. While they're both pretty good, they serve wildly different purposes. All Team Organizer is a fantastic utility card. You can exhaust her to give yourself an extra action point to work with, although keep in mind you do have to use that action point for that turn or else it goes away. If you play her early on and use her effect every turn, then you're playing at many action points ahead of your opponent. If you can somehow manage to get 2 of these in play, then playing out your hand shouldn't be a problem. Twilight Sparkle Ursa Vanquisher is a secret rare and it definitely deserves that title. While this card is at a problem, you can exhaust her and move her back to your hand to take 2 of your opponent's characters at the same problem and move them home. There's a lot of reasons why this is amazing. The first is if you're getting ready for a double face-off and you move both of those characters home, then they can't participate in the face-off. The second is if you don't want to have a face-off, you can get rid of the 2 characters that are solving a problem and then just solve the problem and get your point. The third is you're paying 3 action points to force your opponent to pay 4 action points, moving their characters back over to the problem. The fourth is that this is a completely repeatable effect. So if you have 6 action points, you can pretty much get rid of 4 of your opponent's characters. Even ignoring its effect, paying 3 for a 4-power pony is just too good. Bright Bulb is a great way to control what your opponent is playing from their hands. If your opponent tries to play a friend to the problem that Bright Bulb is at, then you can exhaust him to move it somewhere else. Most commonly you'll end up moving it home, but you can also move it to the other problem if you have some other kind of plan in play. This can be a great counterplay if you know your opponent's going to play something annoying like Octavia or Spring Forward. It also doesn't have a color requirement, so you don't have to worry about getting purple in play before you play it. Zecora is an often overlooked and underutilized card in purple. People tend to shy away from her due to her high cost and her low power. However, if you can look past that and find a space for her in your deck, she can prove to be incredibly beneficial. Every turn you can use her effect to draw 2 cards and then put 1 card from your hand back on top of your deck. This is obviously really good because it gives you hand advantage. Your hand keeps going up by 1. You can also put 1 card that's not really very useful back on top of your deck so that you have a good hand. Her main use, and the reason she's good however, is you can control what card is on top of your deck during a face-off. During your main phase, when you use her effect to draw 2 cards, put something with a really high power on top of your deck. Then you'll know exactly what you're going to draw during your next face-off. A fairly good alternative to Zecora if you can't get a hold of her is Sunny Rays. She costs 2 action points and has 2 power, so she pays herself off in power. The turn she comes into play, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. This lets you choose which card you're going to trigger for a face-off. Knowing what card you're going to trigger for a face-off is a good way to figure out whether or not you want to spend this turn setting a face-off up. Double Check the Checklist is an event card that also kind of fills this niche. By paying only 1 action point, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. Hey, if you see something you really like, then go ahead and pay 1 action point to draw into it. Overall, this is a great card to play if you want this effect but you don't want to fill up a character spot doing it. One thing that purple does really well is move characters around. We've already looked at Bright Bulb, but there are cards that do Bright Bulb's job a little bit better. Back Where You Began is probably the best movement card in the game. For a measly 1 action point, you can move one of your opponent's characters, whether it be at a problem or at home, anywhere you like. This will most commonly be used to move one of your opponent's problematic characters from a problem to home, but it does have other uses. For example, if you want to try to force a face-off, you can move one of your opponent's characters to a problem where you want the face-off to occur. The Trixie Hat is kind of like having a permanent version of that effect. You can exhaust the Trixie Hat and pay 1 action point to move one of your characters at a problem back home. It's not 100% as useful as back where you began, but the fact that it stays in play and you can use it every turn is just amazing. It's a little bit expensive at 3 action points, but if you can find room for it, it's a pretty nice addition. Lastly, we'll look at Mare. There are a lot of problems with Mare, and that's why she's not played very often, but she's at least worth taking a look at. During the main phase, you can pay 3 action points to move one of your opponent's characters. It's very, very costly, but also repeatable. I wouldn't quite say she's as good as Bright Bulb, so I'd put Bright Bulb in before you put in Mare. But if you are running an action point acceleration deck, then she's definitely worth throwing 1 or 2 in. One useful card for acceleration is Spike Take a Letter. It's free, and you'd be surprised how far ahead those 2 action points can put you. Purple is also host to a great variety of resource cards. Fighting for Friendship is definitely one of the best resources in Purple because you can use it not only for regular face-offs but also double face-offs and troublemaker face-offs. Focus Study can almost completely shut down rush decks. Golden Oak Library can keep your hand full of useful events, and even if you don't find any events you need, you can stack your deck to win face-offs. If you're gonna run a lot of resource cards, you can also consider putting this guy in. 1 for a 2-power pony is a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. Gyro's the last card we'll look at in Purple. Gyro is a simple 1-for-1 pony, but his effect does let you search your deck for an event when you play him. You can't really play him until mid to late game, but mid to late game is when you're going to be wanting those back where you begans in your hands. Just keep that in mind when you're building your deck. When choosing a color to mix with, you normally want to go with something to keep your advantages high. Blue can keep your costs low while helping with your positioning. Using Cloud Chaser's effect every turn lets you save a lot of action points, and when mixed in with an all-team organizer Twilight Sparkle, the amount of action points you'll have left over is ridiculous. Gotta Go Fast lets you move a character to a problem for 1 action point. Since it happens during the face-off, it's completely unpredictable and can really throw your opponent off. You can even use it during a troublemaker face-off to make sure that you have enough power to take it out. If your opponent happens to get lucky with a good face-off flip, What Went Wrong is a cheap and easy way to make sure your opponent doesn't get that card. 2 bits costs 1 action point and lowers the cost of the next card we play by 2, making it a very cost-effective card. Orange is really good at controlling the hand, which complements our field control really well. Applejack gets rid of a card when she wins a face-off. That includes troublemaker face-offs and double face-offs. Coco Crusoe gets rid of 2 cards from your opponent's hand every time you reveal a troublemaker at his problem. Drillbit gets rid of 1 card when he comes into play, and he's got a pretty respectable 3 power. Sweet Apple Acres is a resource that stays in play and makes your opponent discard a card every turn you're willing to pay 1 action point. They do get to choose the card, which is a downside, but with the amount of action points you're saving with this kind of deck, you're definitely going to be able to keep this up every turn. White also has some control elements, and some of them combo really well with yours. Featherweight has your opponent flip an additional card during face-offs, but they always ignore the one with the highest power. Fiddly Faddle lets you look at the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck when she comes into play, which gives you even more face-off control. Plus she has 2 power for 2 costs, so she pays for her own power. F-Stop lets you get back 1 of your event cards every turn. This includes cards like Back Where You Began. With such great action token control, it's very easy to keep this effect up a lot. Tangled Coiffure is practically the perfect card to mix with Purple. Use a card to move one of your opponent's friends back home and then play this card on them. Until your opponent can get rid of this card, they can't move that character, and that includes through effects. Pink lets us control some of the more powerful friends on our opponent's side of the field. If Big Top wins in a problem face-off, you can dismiss one of your opponent's friends at that face-off. This doesn't work for double face-offs, but it's still a great effect to have. Responsibility Pinkie Pie has a pretty low power, but she immediately dismisses a friend at a problem when you play her. Pinprick is a much smaller version of Big Top, but he does have a higher color requirement. As a trade-off though, he also gives us the random effect, which further gives us more face-off advantage. Downright Dangerous lets us subtract 2 power from one of our opponent's friends. If their power after the subtraction would make them 0 or less, then they're dismissed. Yellow can give us some control over our opponent's action points. Mr. Breezy makes our opponent lose 1 action point when he comes into play. He's also 3 power for 3 action points, so he pays off his own power. Fluttershy Guidance Counselor is a very powerful card. We can rest it whenever our opponent gains at least 1 action point to have them lose 1 action point. On top of the absurd amount of action points your opponent can lose through this effect, it's also a 3 for 3, so it pays off its own power. Too Many Bandages is a card that gives one of your opponent's friends -2 permanently unless they can figure out how to get rid of this card. Yay is a very simple card. It just gives all of our characters on an opponent's problem +1 power. This is a great surprise card to hold on to because it doesn't cost anything. This can be used to get over troublemakers and even win double face-offs. I think that's all I have to say on MLP today. I hope this video gave you some ideas on how to spruce up your purple deck. If you did enjoy this video, it would really help me out if you left me a like. Give me your thoughts or give me some video suggestions in the comments section below. And finally, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Kudou news. I'll see every pony next video.